A Russian cop wants to get a breathalyzer like the Western cops have to deal with drunk drivers. He asks his superior for one, and his superior says, "Sorry, comrade, we have no money." The cop decides to go to a local black market where he buys a condom. He stops the first driver and says, "Official government breathalyzer test, blow." The driver blows into a condom and the cop notices it smells like vodka. He says, "You drunk, go to police station." He stops the second driver and says, "Official government breathalyzer test, blow." The driver blows into a condom and the cop notices it smells like vodka. He says, "You drunk, go to police station." He stops the third driver and says, "Official government breathalyzer test, blow." The driver says, "You crazy? That is a condom." The cop says, "You are not drunk. You are free to go." An FBI agent tells a Montana rancher, "I need to inspect your ranch for illegal grown drugs." The old rancher says, "Okay, but don't go in that field over there." The agent verbally explodes, saying, "Mister, I have the authority of the federal government with me." Reaching into his rear pant pocket and removing his badge, the officer proudly displays it to the farmer. "See this badge? This badge means I am allowed to go wherever I wish, on any land. No questions were asked or answered. Have I made myself clear? Do you understand?" The old rancher nods politely and goes about his chores. Later, the old rancher hears loud screams and spies the agent running for his life, and close behind is the rancher's bull. With every step, the bull is gaining ground on the agent. The agent is clearly terrified. The old rancher immediately throws down his tools, runs to the fence, and yells at the top of his lungs, "Your badge! Show him your badge!" A guy's mother-in-law comes to live with him. One day he comes home to find her passed out on the floor. He calls 911, the paramedics come and pick her up and take her to the hospital. The guy goes to the hospital and is in the waiting room when the doctor comes out. The doctor says, "Well, I have some good news and some bad news." The guy says, "All right, give me the bad news first." The doctor says, "Your mother-in-law is not going to die. She had a massive stroke, but she is probably going to live another 20, 30 years. The problem is the stroke has rendered her unable to speak. She just makes this horrible screeching noise like a parrot now. It has also disabled her ability to use her arms. For the next 20, 30 years, you are going to have to feed her baby food 3 times a day. Also, it's made her incontinent, so you're going to have to change her diapers and clean her up every single day for the next 20, 30 years. Oh my God." The guy said, "What's the good news?" The doctor chuckles and goes, "I'm just kidding with you. She died." 3 writers, Al, Ben, and Carl, who were attending a writing convention, booked a 3-bedroom suite on the 75th floor of a hotel. When they arrived back at the hotel from the convention, the receptionist told them, "I'm terribly sorry, but all the elevators are broken. In the meantime, you will have to take the stairs." Now, Al was a writer of funny stories, Ben was a writer of scary stories, and Carl was a writer of sad stories. The 3 of them agreed that to make it less boring, Al would tell the other 2 his funniest stories while they climbed from floors 1 to 25. Ben would tell his scariest stories from floors 26 to 50, and Carl would tell his saddest stories from floors 51 to 75. They started to climb the stairs, and Al started to tell funny stories. By the time they reached the 25th floor, Ben and Carl were laughing hysterically. Then Ben started to tell scary stories. By the time they reached the 50th floor, Al and Carl were hugging each other in fear. Then Carl started to tell sad stories. "I'll tell my saddest story of all first," he said. "There once was a man named Carl who left the hotel room key in the car. George was going up to bed when his wife told him that he'd left the light on in the garden shed, which she could see from the bedroom window. George opened the back door to go turn off the light, but saw that there were people in the shed stealing things. He phoned the police, who asked, "Is someone in your house?" And he said no. Then they said that all patrols were busy and that he should simply lock his door and an officer would be along when available. George said, "Okay," hung up, counted to 30, and phoned the police again. "Hello, I just called you a few seconds ago because there were people in my shed. Well, you don't have to worry about them now because I've just shot them all." Then he hung up. Within 5 minutes, 3 police cars, an armed response unit, and an ambulance showed up at George's residence. Of course, the police caught the burglars red-handed. One of the policemen said to George, "I thought you said that you'd shot them." George said, "I thought you said there was nobody available." A man is sitting outside enjoying his morning coffee when he notices his neighbor jumps off his horse, walks behind him, lifts up his tail, and kisses him right where the sun don't shine. Curious, he walks over to his neighbor and asks him, "Excuse me, Bob, did you just do what I thought you did?" "What might that be?" His neighbor answers back, "Well, near as I can tell, it looks like you hopped off old Bessie here, walked behind her, lifted up her tail and kissed her right where the sun don't shine." "Oh, that. Well, I have chapped lips," his neighbor answers back. "Well, does that heal them?" he asks. "No, but it sure keeps me from licking them." An 80-year-old man was having his annual checkup when the doctor asked how he was feeling. "I've never been better," he boasted. "I've got an 18-year-old bride who's pregnant and having my child. What do you think about that?" The doctor considered this for a moment, then said, "Let me tell you a story. I knew a guy who was an avid hunter. He never missed a season. But one day he went out in a bit of a hurry and accidentally grabbed his umbrella instead of his gun." The doctor continued. "So he was in the woods and suddenly a grizzly bear appeared in front of him. He raised up his umbrella, pointed it at the bear, and squeezed the handle. And do you know what happened?" the doctor queried. Dumbfounded, the old man replied, "No, what?" The doctor continued. "The bear dropped dead in front of him." "That's impossible," exclaimed the old man. "Someone else must have shot the bear." "That's kind of what I'm getting at," replied the doctor. The nun teaching Sunday school was speaking to her class one morning, and she asked the question, "When you die and go to heaven, which part of your body goes first?" Susie raised her hand and said, "I think it's your hands." "Why do you think it's your hands, Susie?" Susie replied, "Because when you pray, you hold your hands together in front of you and God just takes your hands first." "What a wonderful answer," the nun said. Little Johnny raised his hand and said, "Sister, I think it's your feet." The nun looked at him with the strangest look on her face. "Now, Johnny, why do you think it would be your feet?" Little Johnny said, "Well, I walked into Mommy and Daddy's bedroom the other night. Mommy had her legs straight up in the air, and she was saying, 'Oh, God, I'm coming.' I have to tell you, if Dad hadn't pinned her down, we'd have lost her." So these two ladies walk into a mortician's office. The first woman says to the mortician, "I've got my husband here in his very best blue suit, but what I'd really appreciate is if you could have him in a black suit for the funeral. Here's a blank check. Use whatever you need. I just want him in a black suit." The mortician agrees and thanks the woman, and the first woman leaves. Now the second woman comes in and says, "I know I've brought my husband wearing a black suit, but I've always really loved him in blue. Is there any way you can have him in a blue suit for his funeral?" The mortician assures her that it's not a problem, and the second woman thanks her and leaves. A few days later, the mortician shows up at the first man's funeral, and his widow walks up and says, "Thank you so much for doing this. My husband looks wonderful in the black suit you found him." The mortician replies, "Of course I was happy to do it, and here's your check back." "No, I really appreciate it, and I want to pay you. Just take whatever you need." "Oh no, really, it didn't cost me anything. You see, right after you came in, a woman showed up with her husband in a black suit, and she wanted him wearing blue. So in the end, all I had to do was switch the heads." Two fellas are walking in the woods one day when they come upon a gigantic hole, so big and deep that they can't see the bottom of it. Naturally, their curiosity gets the best of them, and they start looking for things to throw in the hole. They find sticks and rocks and throw them in, but never hear anything hit the bottom of the hole. Eventually, they find an old railroad tie and figure they'll definitely hear that hit the bottom, so they lug it over and throw it in. A few seconds pass, but they still don't hear it hit the bottom. They shrug and start to walk away, when all of a sudden a cow comes charging through the woods at them and jumps into the hole. "That was crazy," they say to each other as they're walking out of the woods. A farmer is walking into the woods at the same time and greets them. The guys tell the farmer about the hole they found. The farmer asks if the guys have seen his cow. They say, "As a matter of fact, we saw a cow come sprinting through the woods and jump into that hole." The farmer shakes his head and says, "Well, that couldn't have been my cow. My cow was tied to a railroad tie." two 90-year-old women. Rose and Barb had been friends all of their lives. When it was clear that Rose was dying, Barb visited her every day. One day, Barb said, "Rose, we both loved playing women's softball all our lives, and we played all through high school. Please do me one favor. When you get to heaven, somehow you must let me know if there's women's softball there." Rose looked up at Barb from her deathbed and said, "Barb, you've been my best friend for many years. If it's at all possible, I'll do this favor for you." Shortly after that, Rose passed on. At midnight, a few nights later, Barb was awakened from a sound sleep by a blinding flash of white light and a voice calling out to her, "Barb, Barb!" "Who is it?" asked Barb, sitting up suddenly. "Who is it?" "Barb, it's me, Rose." "You're not Rose. Rose just died." "I'm telling you, it's me, Rose," insisted the voice. "Rose, where are you?" "In heaven," replied Rose. "I have some really good news and a little bad news." "Tell me the good news first," said Barb. "The good news," Rose said, "is that there's softball in heaven. Better yet, all of our old buddies who died before us are here too. Better than that, we're all young again. Better still, it's always springtime, and it never rains or snows, and best of all, we can play softball all we want, and we never get tired." "That's fantastic," said Barb. "It's beyond my wildest dreams. So what's the bad news?" "You're pitching Tuesday." Once upon a time in a village, a man appeared and announced to the villagers that he would buy monkeys for $10 each. The villagers, seeing that there were many monkeys around, went out to the forest and started catching them. The man bought thousands at $10, and as supply started to diminish, the villagers stopped their effort. He further announced that he would now buy at $20. This renewed the efforts of the villagers, and they started catching monkeys again. Soon the supply diminished even further, and people started going back to their farms. The offer increased to $25 each, and the supply of monkeys became so little that it was an effort to even see a monkey, let alone catch it. The man now announced that he would buy monkeys at $50. However, since he had to go to the city on some business, his assistant would now buy on behalf of him. In the absence of the man, the assistant told the villagers, "Look at all these monkeys in the big cage that the man has collected. I will sell them to you at $35, and when the man returns from the city, you can sell them to him for $50 each." The villagers rounded up with all their savings and bought all the monkeys. They never saw the man nor his assistant, only monkeys everywhere. Now you have a better understanding of how the cryptocurrency market works. The teacher stood in front of the class and said, "All right, I'm going to hold something under my desk, and I want you to guess what it is." She reached down and held up her first mystery object. "This one is round and red." Little Johnny's hand shot up immediately, but the teacher ignored him. She knew his reputation. "A plum, miss?" guessed a girl. "No," the teacher said with a smile. "It's an apple, but I like the way you think." She reached for the next item. "This one is oval-shaped and green." Again, Johnny waved his hand frantically, but she called on another student. "An iguana, miss?" Billy offered. The teacher chuckled. "No, it's a kiwi, but I like the way you think." Johnny couldn't hold back any longer. "Ooh, miss, I've got one," he said, grinning. "It's stiff, about an inch long, and has a red knob on the end." The teacher gasped. "Johnny, that's disgusting." Johnny smirked. "Nah, miss, it's a matchstick, but I like the way you think." A man shows up for work a week late. His boss starts to yell at him, but the man interrupts. "Before you begin, I have a good explanation," the man says. "I can't wait to hear it," the boss exclaims. "I was at a Polish wedding this weekend." Flustered, the boss yells, "What does that have to do with anything?" "Well," the man said, "I won the second prize in the raffle. I had to spend a week fucking the bride." The boss looks at him in bewilderment. "If that was the second prize, what was the first?" he asks. The man replied, "A canned ham." A lawyer is at an airport and starts feeling really bored while waiting for his flight. He notices that he's sitting next to a blonde woman. She's reading a book. He assumes that the woman is an idiot because she's a blonde. "Hey, I want to play a game. I'll ask you a question, and then you ask me a question, and we'll see who answers the most right." Thanks, but no thanks. I'm trying to read this book. How about this? If we don't know the answer, we'll give each other $5. The blonde woman shakes her head. How about you give me $5 if you don't know the answer, and I give you $500 if I don't know the answer? The blonde woman shrugs. All right. What country's neighbor Tajikistan? The woman gives him $5, and he laughs. What has 12 legs at birth but loses one every time it rains? The lawyer looks at her with a confused expression. He repeats the question to himself multiple times and starts to look it up on the internet. The woman goes back to reading while the lawyer reads every single website he could find. He spent hours searching and started calling friends and family members to see if they knew. Eventually, his flight arrived. The lawyer sighed in defeat and handed the woman $500. She smiled and took his money. So what's the answer? She gave him $5. An old Doberman was out for a stroll, chasing rabbits, when he suddenly realized he had no idea where he was. As he looked around to get his bearings, he spotted a young panther stalking him from the trees, clearly thinking about making him lunch. Oh boy, this doesn't look good, the old dog thought. But then he spotted a pile of bones nearby. Thinking quickly, he plopped down with his back to the panther and began gnawing on a bone loudly. Just as the panther was about to pounce, the Doberman shouted out, that last pancake was delicious. I wonder if there's another one around here." The panther froze mid-leap, eyes wide with fear, and slinked away into the woods. "Yikes, that was too close," the panther whispered. "That dog's a killer." But up in the tree, a squirrel had watched the whole scene. Eager to earn some protection, the squirrel dashed after the panther and spilled the whole story, telling him the Doberman had been bluffing. Furious at being tricked, the panther growled, "Hop on, squirrel, we're going back, and this time that dog's finished." Back in the clearing, the Doberman saw the panther charging toward him, with the squirrel riding shotgun. Thinking fast, he turned his back again and acted as if he hadn't noticed them. Just as they got within earshot, the old Doberman said aloud, "Where is that squirrel? I sent him off hours ago to bring me another panther." A sign on a restaurant window says, "If you order it and we don't have it, you instantly win $1 million. A man walking by notices the sign and walks in the restaurant and sits down at the table with a smirk on his face. The waiter asks what he will be having, and the man says, "I will have white rhinoceros stew, please." The waiter comes out with a boiling hot bowl of exactly what the man ordered. The man is taken by surprise, but he eats the stew and pays for his very expensive meal. He leaves angrily. The next day he comes back and sits at the table with a smirk on his face again. He tells the waiter, "Today I will have bullet ants stuffed with dolphin meat." The waiter leaves and quickly comes back after a few minutes with exactly what the man ordered. The man, surprised again, eats his meal angrily, pays, and leaves. The next day he comes back and sits at the table and tells the waiter, "Today I will have a lactating mermaid breast sandwich." A few minutes go by, and the waiter comes out holding 2 massive duffel bags with the $1 million. The man, overcome with excitement, says, "I knew it! You don't have mermaid breasts." The waiter tells him politely, "We actually have it, sir. It's just that we ran out of bread." A blonde, a redhead, and a brunette go on a road trip. In the middle of the night, their car breaks down next to a farm with an old barn. They decide that, instead of knocking on the door and waking people up in the middle of the night, they're going to spend the night in the barn. In the morning, the girls wake up to the sound of the old farmer whistling and opening the door to the barn, since they don't want to get caught. The girls see some old sacks and hide in them. The farmer walks in and says, "I don't remember these sacks being full." He walks up to the first sack where the brunette is hiding. "I wonder what's in here." The brunette goes, "Meow. Hey, that's just an old farm cat," the farmer says, and he goes off to the second sack where the redhead is hiding. "Well, what's in this sack?" The redhead goes, "Woof, woof." That's just an old farm dog." The farmer chuckles and makes his way to the final sack where the blonde is hiding. "Now, what in the world could be in this sack here?" The blonde yells out, "Potatoes?" It was George the mailman's last day on the job after 35 years of carrying the mail through all kinds of weather to the same neighborhood. When he arrived at the first house on his route, he was greeted by the whole family, who congratulated him and sent him on his way with a tidy gift envelope. At the second house, they presented him with a box of fine cigars. The folks at the third house handed him a selection of terrific fishing lures. At the fourth house, he was met at the door by a strikingly beautiful blonde woman in a revealing negligee. She took him by the hand, gently led him through the door, which she closed behind him, and took him up the stairs to the bedroom, where she blew his mind with the most passionate love he had ever experienced. When he had enough, they went downstairs and she fixed him a giant breakfast: eggs, potatoes, ham, sausage, blueberry waffles, and fresh squeezed orange juice. When he was truly satisfied, she poured him a cup of steaming coffee. As she was pouring, he noticed a dollar bill sticking out from under the cup's bottom edge. "All this was just too wonderful for words," he said. "But what's the dollar for?" "Well," she said, "last night I told my husband that today would be your last day and that we should do something special for you. I asked him what to give you. He said, 'Screw him, give him $1. The breakfast was my idea.'" School students are taught that lying is a sin. However, instructions also advise that using a bit of imagination is okay to express the truth differently without lying. Below is a perfect example of those teachings. An attractive young woman on a flight from Ireland asked the priest beside her, "Father, may I ask a favor?" "Of course, child. What may I do for you?" "Well, I bought my mother an expensive hairdryer for her birthday. It is unopened, but well over the customs limits, and I'm afraid they'll confiscate it. Is there any way you could carry it through customs for me? Hide it under your robes, perhaps. I would love to help you, dear, but I must warn you I will not lie." "With your honest face, Father, no one will question you," she replied. When they got to customs, she let the priest go first. The official asked, "Father, do you have anything to declare?" "From the top of my head down to my waist, I have nothing to declare." The official thought this answer strange, so he asked, "And what do you have to declare from your waist to the floor?" Father replied, "I have a marvelous instrument designed to be used on a woman, which is to date unused." Roaring with laughter, the official said, "Go ahead, Father. Next, please." After dating the young lady for some time, the young man decides it is time to marry her. He proceeds with all the necessary plans, and finally, the day comes. On the day of the wedding, the young man has yet to pay the pastor for performing the ceremony. However, the pastor has a plan. The service proceeds as planned, the vows are exchanged, etc. Now it is time for the groom to kiss his bride. The pastor sees this as the perfect opportunity to ask to be paid. He pulls the young man aside and asks him, "Can you please pay me?" Not wanting to create a scene, the young man asked, "How much do I owe you?" The pastor thinks quickly and replies, "Pay me according to your wife's beauty." The young man discreetly pulled out $5 and gave it to the pastor. Although annoyed by this, the pastor continues the ceremony and says, "You may now kiss the bride." At this point, the veil is lifted from the bride's face to allow the groom to kiss her. As the groom is about to kiss his new bride, the pastor interrupts and promptly hands the groom $4.50. An Englishman, an American, and a Japanese man are whitewater rafting when suddenly the river takes a deadly turn, straight toward a massive waterfall they didn't know was there. As they're moments away from plunging to their doom, a genie bursts out of the water in a flash of light. "I am the spirit of the waterfall," the genie says. "I cannot save you, but I can grant each of you one final wish before you go over." The American is up first. "I love my country. Before I die, I want to sing the national anthem, the full version. Give my friends lyric sheets, a live orchestra, and a gospel choir. I want it to be beautiful." The genie nods. "It will be done." The Japanese man steps forward. "I, too, love my country. Let me enjoy one last taste of home. Fermented soybeans, sea urchin, raw horse meat, pickled seaweed, sugared omelets, and enough to share with my friends." The genie bows. "It will be done." Then the Englishman leans in, lowers his voice, and whispers in the genie's ear, "Be a good chap and just shove me over the bloody edge before the singing starts and the raw horse shows up." An Englishman, a German, and a Frenchman are caught smuggling alcohol in Saudi Arabia, a serious offense. They're sentenced to 50 lashes each. On the day of the punishment, the sheikh approaches them and says, "It's my wife's birthday today. I'll grant each of you one wish before you're whipped." The German goes first. After thinking for a moment, he says, "Please, tie a pillow to my back." The pillow is secured, but after 20 lashes, the whip cuts through and the German is carried away, bleeding and in agony. Next, the Frenchman steps up, watching the German with wide eyes. "I'd like 2 pillows on my back," he says confidently. The pillows are placed, but after 35 lashes, the whip cuts through again and the Frenchman is led away, wailing and moaning in pain. Finally, it's the Englishman's turn. Before he can say anything, the sheikh looks at him and says, "You come from a land that I admire. I will grant you 2 wishes." The Englishman nods. "Thank you, your most merciful highness. For my first wish, I request 100 lashes. The sheikh is impressed. "You are brave indeed. 100 lashes it is. Would you like pillows?" The Englishman smiles. "No, no pillows, but I'd like you to tie the Frenchman and the German to my back." The Presbyterian Church called an emergency meeting to deal with their squirrel infestation. After much prayer and thoughtful consideration, they concluded that the squirrels were predestined to be there, and they shouldn't interfere with God's divine will. At the Baptist church, the squirrels had become particularly fond of the baptistry. The deacons quickly gathered and decided to install a water slide to let the squirrels drown themselves. Unfortunately, the squirrels enjoyed the slide so much and instinctively knew how to swim, so they returned with twice the numbers the next week. The Lutheran Church, not wanting to harm any of God's creatures, decided to humanely trap the squirrels and release them near the Baptist church. 2 weeks later, the squirrels were back when the Baptists took down the water slide. The Episcopalians tried a more unique approach. They set out pans of whiskey around the church, hoping to get the squirrels drunk enough to pass out. What they didn't anticipate was how much damage a group of inebriated squirrels could cause. But the Catholic Church came up with the most creative solution. They baptized all the squirrels and made them official members of the church. Now they only see them at Christmas and Easter. As for the Jewish synagogue, they took the first squirrel, circumcised him, and they haven't seen a squirrel since. An old hillbilly farmer had a wife who nagged him unmercifully. From morning till night, she was always complaining about something. The only time he got any relief was when he was out plowing with his old mule. He tried to plow a lot. One day, when he was out plowing, his wife brought him lunch in the field. He drove the old mule into the shade, sat down on a stump, and began to eat his lunch. Immediately, his wife began nagging him again. Complain, nag, it just went on and on. All of a sudden, the old mule lashed out with both hind feet and caught her smack in the back of the head, killed her dead on the spot. At the funeral several days later, the minister noticed something rather odd. When a woman mourner when he approached the old farmer, he would listen for a minute, then nod his head in agreement. But when a male mourner approached him, he would listen for a minute, then shake his head in disagreement. This was so consistent, the minister decided to ask the old farmer about it. So, after the funeral, the minister spoke to the old farmer and asked him why he nodded his head and agreed with the women, but always shook his head and disagreed with all the men. The old farmer said, "Well, the women would come up and say something about how nice my wife looked or how pretty her dress was, so I'd nod my head in agreement." "And what about the men?" the minister asked. "They wanted to know if the mule was for sale." Two men are in custody in County Cork after police seized what's believed to be the biggest single drug haul in Ireland's history. They say up to a ton of cocaine in 40 sealed packages has been recovered from the sea off the coast of Mizen Head, Ireland's most southerly point. The consignment, estimated to be worth more than $100 million, was on board a dinghy that capsized in rough seas with 2 men on board. One man managed to swim ashore and raise the alarm before the second man was rescued. The drugs were wrapped in 1-meter-long white waterproof bales. Locals reported seeing dozens of them bobbing in the sea off Dunlock Bay, about a mile offshore, before police scooped them up. Source SM8H. God bless the Irish, eh? I thought pirates couldn't swim, son.